Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. And today, I have the joy of reading a very recent quote channeling. This is a long one, and it covers a lot of different information. We get some background information about the development of Quo, the origins of Quo, the meaning of the name of Quo, and they talk about a variety of topics, including spacecraft, the mythology of spacecraft, angels, and disclosure. Quo is a group of higher density beings that are channeled through LL research. They've been doing this for over 50 years, and each of these channelings carry deep and significant spiritual information that will help you on your spiritual path. This was delivered on May 9th, 2024. The topics covered is the degree of participation of the conscious instrument in channeling, the principles of living with mental spiritual pain, the meaning of Quo, how 3 social memory complexes collaborate to form Quo, the presence of the constituent groups of Quo for the contact, possibilities between conscious and trance channeling, humor in the law of one, the meaning of mythology and spacecraft as mythology, spacecraft and angels as mythological constructs, empiricism as mythology and the spectrum of accurate comprehension, and the mythology of disclosure. This one begins with Trisha channeling. We are those of Quo, and we are with this instrument. We gather with this circle on this day with great joy, with great admiration, and with great excitement. We thoroughly enjoy the company of the partnered path, the seeking among friends and family for the spiritual home, and we feel immensely blessed to be part of this configuration, to be of service to one another, us to you and you to us. We are attempting to feel our way through this instrument, and this instrument likewise with us, for this is a new process in terms of the timing of our contact, and we appreciate the space for the patience and grace as she feels her way through, so to speak, and in our contact. And through our words that are channeled, we would ask one favor of those who may receive these words, and that is that one exercise the personal discernment, that when one receives these words, reads these words, and deems these words, that one allow the messages that do not resonate to fall away. If you or any seeker who may happen upon these messages would grant us that favor, we then would feel more free and have a clear pathway to communicate through this instrument. We shall take one brief moment to deepen our connection and contact through this instrument. We thank you for the patience, and we would ask if there's a query to which we may speak. Gary. Yes, and first let me give thanks to the instrument for her willingness to attempt this new experiment in receiving the first contact. So I often feel that the instrument has a role in determining where the channeled response goes, what part of the concept ball is unpacked. Is the instrument's role passive and led by Quo or the source, or does the instrument participate in directing the focus? We are those of Quo, and we are aware and thankful for this query, my brother. And we would additionally like to speak a word of gratitude and thanks for the kindness that you had voiced to this particular instrument as she is feeling a bit self-conscious, though is honored to attempt the first contact. In regard to your query, the orientation, the directioneering, that the channeling, that the thought, that the message may find itself progressing towards can be of 2 varied responsibilities. We find, at least insofar as we speak through this instrument, that there are perhaps layers or strata of depth in channeling, of the conscious variety that both allow the instrument to exercise more free will and participation, and those that are perhaps that you had termed in a previous conversation a trust fall. These various strata of channeling are neither differentiated by quality per se, or by quantity of the material that is produced. Simply, they are but 2 avenues, 2 differing paths towards the end goal of the channeling process. With that, we would state that the free will of the instrument to you, as you called, unpack this concept or thought, may be exercised with discernment, for it is the instrument who intends to be a clear channel, the one that invests the energy to thoroughly challenge the contact, the one that, as this instrument says in her tuning process, allows the self to be meek yet brave, that the exercise of this free will and the untangling of these thought or concept balls that is of a variety, that how you may we correct this instrument, for she's feeling challenged by the thought and concept balls she is now attempting to untangle, but will hence do a trust fall into this, that is, with the pure intention setting and the thorough challenging that the free will exercise of this unpacking allows that which comes through the seeker to be of a crystalline nature, to be pure. So the instrument merely acts as the driver in terms of the pushing of the accelerator and the steering of the wheel. However, the information is the roadway, if that metaphor is clear. The information that comes through the seeker who has purely intended and thoroughly tuned themselves in service to others and in service to the universe, that this track appears. Again, the instrument merely is exercising the free will of the self to decide to put the energy into the unpacking, to be able to note where that ball of yarn unravels and to follow that string. And we say that knowing that often these concept or thought bubbles, if you will, these balls of yarn, have many strands, many offshoots, but with the dual practice of the will alongside the faith, the seeker, the instrument, may be able to navigate this concept or thought in a way that is free of the mental distortion that may present itself when the instrument is more present in its illusory vehicle, the egoic, the grounded self. This instrument says, as the one known as Squash bats her leg, Squash is the name of their cat, will attempt to go a bit deeper before speaking further on this topic. On the other side of that coin, there are instances wherein the fully vetted and purely intended instrument may release itself from the binds of the self-judgment, of the questioning of what is coming through them, that they may allow themselves to be more of an open window. The stained glass still presents, but the breeze more self-directed, as with the instrument who elects to freely pull that yarn string. This particular style of channeling of blind faith and allowing the self to be free of the detective work, if you will be of a nature that is pure, that is of a little distortion, so long as, again, the intention and the tuning and challenging are exercised genuinely and fully. You may see this particular style of channeling present outside of gatherings such as this, for there are the artists, the musicians, the writers who feel inspired to tackle a topic or an idea and find themselves teasing away in contemplation to find the direction to which the energy wants to flow. And there are likewise the artists, the musicians, the writers who allow the energy to flow through them freely. It is always in the service of the self-expression, that it may ultimately be in service to the larger whole, that the end product is one of the channeled variety. There are plenty on your planet at this time who practice such techniques. The automatic writing, the scribbling and doodling, the improvisational play of the instruments of the musical variety. We apologize for the pause. This instrument feels as though this contact could be made deeper, and this topic could be further explored through her. However, we may ask that attempt be made at a later time or through a different instrument in this session. For her ability to maintain the focus is feeling diminished and depleted at this time. We feel the need to speak through this instrument her desire to continue, though she feels insecure in that prospect, for she wonders if it is foolhardy to not attempt to go deeper to explore this first question. Gary, Quo, if I may interrupt for a moment, would it be supportive to the instrument to remove the one known as Squash, who has invited himself onto her lap? We are those of Quo, and we appreciate this query. We scan this instrument, and we appreciate of that offer and must giggle a bit because in her illusory experience, in what you call the recent past, it is perhaps a bit too late at this moment, for the one known as Squash is settled and not providing nearly the distraction as he was prior. We will ask if we may expand on the previous query any further, if there may be a follow-up to the query or an avenue to which we could speak. We are those of Quo. Honestly, Quo, the one known as Squash was distracting to me as well, and so no, I do not have a follow-up to that question. We are those of Quo, and we thank you. And we would ask if there may be a second separate question to which we may practice through this instrument. Gary, yeah, and in the spirit of practice, I'm going to vibrate a long question, but it is mostly preamble, and the question is at the very end, and I will emphasize at the moment that I'm asking the question. The preamble is just a reflection on my own journey. While in that journey, I have moments of joy and glory and connection an orgasm and awe in the beauty of our world, there are also deep and difficult patterns that chronically drift up from my subconscious that baffle and besiege my intellectual mind. In attempting to describe them, I see that there are feeling tones of generalized fear and insecurity, and inexplicably shame in who I am, and deep grief about the world and its suffering and injustice, etc. These energies contribute a great deal of pain and keep me in a semi-contracted state. When I dig down in, I feel the syndrome of a stranger in a strange land. That is, I think that part of me feels imprisoned in an alien world that is unsafe and potentially threatening, and another part of me holds a deep level of pain for the crush of cruelty on this planet. These love-deficient energies don't compel any particular action in the world, save maybe for my folly of self-medication. I'm a highly functional entity practiced in compartmentalization. In general, these energies just keep me bottled in, periodically with low-level dread and anxiety, other times with acute torment that keep me separated from the rightness of my essence and the fullness of my being. I've been able to divine these distortions with more clarity in my latter years, and I'm coming to understand the role that diet and lifestyle play in my mental health and brain chemistry, but nonetheless, these have been with my whole adult life. In my attempts to heal, I've brought about present moment awareness to these energies. I've sat with them, felt them. I've attempted various means of making inquiry to the subconscious mind, hoping to teach the root of origin of these energies. I've meditated a great deal, yet I find myself episodically beleaguered. Now, the question, what are the spiritual principles involved in living with mental spiritual pain? We are those of Quo, and we are aware of the query and appreciate the query, my brother. Through this instrument, we feel compelled to issue a statement that we hope does not land as devaluing or patronizing, but simply to communicate the rightness of it all. And that statement is one of what a journey and a path you have chosen, my friend. There are those among your Christian faith who may state that God chooses his strongest warriors for his toughest battles. And while we do not see it in quite that same way, we recognize that this incarnational pattern you struggle with, as you may say, is one that was chosen to fully test the self and the Creator. If one views each incarnation as an exercise of the Creator, then those incarnations that are rife with the discomfort of the mental and spiritual and physical varieties are likened unto the ultramarathon, if you will, or rather the Ironman, you might call it, the gauntlet of exercise of experience, that this particular journey is so pregnant with opportunity to feel challenged and therefore is so ripe with opportunities to practice acceptance and love and forgiveness, that from the cosmic perspective, we see those with said incarnational experiences to sup at a table overflowing with food of the spiritual nature, that you have this buffet of opportunities. Again, we do not mean to communicate in any way that there is luck or unluck involved, or that experiences exist within a system of value judgments of more or less hard or easier. Simply that this particular structure that you have chosen for yourself is intentional and is so made that you, your spirit, you as this fraction, this grain of sand of the greater Creator, may fully test yourself, that you have set the conditions to stretch your ability to practice your faith, to hone your will, to crystallize your seeking, to focus your energy. We understand that these illusory incarnational experiences may be wildly uncomfortable, may make your question why, but that is purposeful, that is the strength training, the toning, the chance to more fully express the spiritual body in a way that opens up the spirit to more fully understand its rightful role in this cosmic experience, that being of the Creator. We can understand that challenge, the feeling of being a stranger in a strange land where there is a perceived cruelty and unfairness, that perhaps it is difficult to find the sun when the rain is pouring so heavily, but it is in those situations and those environments that the self can create its own pathway towards that direct sunlight of oneness. That being the exercise of faith, that being the intention of expressing love, that being the focusing of energy on the service to others, that being the open-heartedness that sees that the rain that falls, that feels so heavy, is also life-giving and feeds the plants and the blooms. There are spiritual schools that teach the lesson that to fully know the light, one must also understand the shadow, for without that polarity, there would be little context. little ways of making sense. And so this particular set of parameters or conditions you have chosen are also of that variety that allow you to see the full spectrum, so that you may further understand and accept and know the light just as much as you can accept and know and love the dark. A painting of one color would not impart upon the viewer much information about what is meaning to be expressed. But when the painter is allowed to grasp and experience the full range of catalyst, that depth and vibrancy, color and form become more clear. And the beauty or the energetic message that is in this metaphor, the experience of the self, becomes but an additional masterpiece in the museum of the Creator, alongside the infinitely unique other masterpieces. At this time, feeling that we have spoken as much as this instrument is able to energetically, physically at this time, and realizing we just repeated the phrase "at this time," simply denoting her fatigue, we shall take our leave of this instrument with gratitude and transfer our contact to the one known as Austin. We are those of Quo. Austin channeling. I am Quo, and now with this instrument, we would reiterate through this instrument our gratitude for this circle of seeking. Not just those present within this room, but all those who have joined us in our seeking by calling for information and inspiration and reaching out and inviting us into your experience, so that we may join you in offering our experience and sharing a bit about our own journeys and our own understanding, in the hopes that this sharing will act as a catalyst for you in aiding your realization of the ultimate truth, that is, that we are one in the same, the one infinite Creator experiencing itself in a grand act of manifestation and magic. Having established our contact with this instrument, we would ask if there is another query to which we may respond. Gary. In Carla and Jim's understanding, the word Quo was a Latin word that translated into English to mean who. This then prompted them in the 80s, I believe, to ask who Quo was, which resulted in learning that Quo is a blending of 3 social memory complexes. However, after some research recently, it seems that the Latin word Quo translates to where, and related words in English, and the English word who translates to qui, but not Quo. Point being, Quo doesn't seem to mean who. Carla and Jim may have had a misunderstanding, which is yet another reason to exercise discernment when absorbing conscious channeling, our own included. So my question is there anything that can be said about the name Quo? Also, why does Quo show up, and what is the benefit of Quo? Austin channeling. We are Quo when we are aware of the query, my brother. And this query stretches the capacities of this instrument in order to dive into the origins of how such a vibration is chosen and presented within this act of channeling. We would offer the idea that this seeming mistake upon the parts of the ones known as Carla and Jim, that this act of discovery and contemplating what this vibration means, whether in a Latin context, in an English context, or in a context beyond any constraints of a specific language or specific form of vibration, is part of the journey of the seeker when engaging in such an act of channeling. That the one known as Carla, upon initially receiving a new and unique contact, perceives a vibration that has meaning not just to that entity, the instrument in this context, but to those who would perceive this vibration at that moment and into the future, that the understanding of this vibration to have one meaning or another may generate certain questions or certain catalysts. This does not rely upon any specific language or restriction upon what the vibration might mean, but instead, the intuition of the instrument combined with the intention of us as that source generates a certain vibration, whether it is that which we identify as such, as in the case of the other entities, those of Hatan or Latui, for instance, or whether it is a new configuration, a new invention to identify a specific type of contact. The ones known as Jim and Carla may have understood our name to have one specific meaning, and now, upon further exploration, it is discovered that it has a different meaning. And this act of exploration is indeed an aspect of why this vibration was manifest in that moment, to pose these questions to cause this exploration. We can say that for our parts and the role we played in selecting the vibration Quo, specifically, we did not necessarily intend it to have a restrictive meaning, so to speak, but to express that this mystery, this curiosity, with an understanding that it could cause the instrument at that time to pose certain questions, that it could create a sense of intrigue and mystery, and that this journey of mystery would continue to unfold from that point in time. At this point in time, we do not ascribe any particular meaning to the vibration quo beyond that which you identify our contact as. This is how we choose to present ourselves in relationship to you and others who may understand this unique vibration and collaboration that has formed a sort of life of its own and has taken upon itself this name. This vibration may evolve in meaning and context, but will always remain a point upon which we can rely to generate identification and the inherent mystery of what it means to identify as a particular thing and why such vibrations are chosen to differentiate different aspects of the Creator. We find this instrument in attempting to assess the information that comes through it finds confusion. We are quite satisfied with that conclusion of confusion and mystery. Is there a further query, my brother? Thank you, Quo. These CC circles are intended by we instruments as something of a jam session, as we have called them, in the attempt to experiment and to explore, thus the spirit of the questions. Regarding Quo, this may be completely outside the realm of possibility. Is it possible to describe how the three social memory complexes involved in Quo, who are named to be Haton, Latui, and Ra, what the mechanism of this collaboration is when you three come together as Quo? Are all three of you present and blending into one super entity called Quo in order to respond to our questions? Do you put your knowledge into a kind of shared repository, kind of like a more intelligent AI representative of you three that you call Quo, that then responds to us? If possible, how does it work? We are Quo, and we're aware of the query, my brother. In one sense, you are correct in your assumption that it may be somewhat impossible to describe the mechanism behind this joining, for there is much about the underlying mechanisms that lie beyond the third density conceptualization, particularly as your focus and your awareness is so constrained within the space-time dimension that the dynamics of time-space elude your understanding. However, we can offer a somewhat analogous explanation with the understanding that it is inadequate to address the full scope of how this mechanism works. Indeed, in a sense, there is a certain repository, as you have described it, to which the three social memory complexes of Haton, Latui, and Ra contribute with will and intention, and this repository is formed and creates a very literal object or entity within the time-space realm. However, we would not use the analogy that you have used within your query of an AI or computer necessarily, that is interfacing with the instrument in order to tap this repository. For this act of channeling, as you experienced for the most part, is indeed a type of dance between you as an entity and as a mind-body-spirit complex and as an aspect of the Creator, and us as what you could call an entity. In particularly, those of Latui are performing, in a sense, this dance, taking upon themselves the will of Haton and Ra and the information deposited into this repository and utilizing this gift during the interaction of the act of channeling. And so you can see, in a sense, that the social memory complex Latui, and even individuals within this social memory complex, act somewhat as representatives of this dynamic. However, the full beingness of Haton and Ra and what they wish to offer to you as seekers into your planet are available, and this is an ongoing dynamic. For this repository is not static. There is a continuous feeding and receiving, and your interactions and questions in the journey of seeking that we share together form the basis of this repository. And everything becomes one grand, beautiful mechanism or entity, operating in harmony both in time-space and in space-time. And your parts, as you see it from your current perspective, are to perform that aspect of the dance that manifests within the space-time and brings through that repository of information of light, of love, and forms into certain patterns that can be accessed and understood by you and by others who desire to take part in this dance. And by interfacing with the words that are spoken, become a part of this mechanism and contribute themselves to that repository. This is a great honor for us to be able to work together as a trio of social memory complexes that interfaces with you, our friends and brothers and sisters who have chosen to take upon themselves the veil of forgetting in order to serve and to learn, and you honor us by your desire to exchange with us and with your contributions yourself to this repository. Is there a further query, my brother? Yes, this repository, in a way, does this mean that we're not getting the best of Latui or Haton, or obviously we're not getting the fullness of Ra, as some sort of middle space between us and you, Latwii, as an interface that's adequate for the most part to our questions but lacks the fullness of a more direct channeling of, say, Latwii or Haton. I am Quo, and am aware of your query, my brother. This is a complicated query to address, for it has implications beyond the dynamic of simply this act of channeling and this dance that we are partaking in. For it poses the question of identity and beingness itself, in a creation where everything is one, and where all entities are in a very real sense the one infinite creator, but where paradoxically, as you experience to an incredible degree within third density, there seem to be portions that can adopt an individual identity and have individual patterns that have access to specific types of information and experiences. And we would say in response to your query that this identity of each individual, whether it is a single mind-body-spirit complex or a social memory complex, will always be, you can say, infinitely out of reach of any other individual entity. There are aspects of yourself that are known only to you as a personal entity and identity. And there are aspects of those of Ra that can only ever be accessed from the very personal inward identity of Ra, until the point that all realize themselves as the one infinite creator and join again at the end of your octave. And so, relying upon this notion that each entity and social memory complex may contain a very personal identity, this identity is utilized in any interaction with any other aspect of the creation and must be limited somewhat to that intersection of one entity and another entity. So it is true that when these three social memory complexes come together in order to serve and to offer themselves to this service, that there are some hidden aspects that remain forever and infinitely hidden that cannot be offered. However, those of Ra, those of Latwii, and those of Haton offer as much as they can in the context of this service, and that context will forever be dynamic and changing. We would invoke to solidify our point the contact with those of Ra that you are familiar with earlier in this group seeking, and that through it seemed as though that was a much more direct and full contact with those of Ra. There were still limitations upon that contact, that those of Ra could not express themselves in the infinite depth of their beingness. There was a quite significant limitation upon how they could offer themselves in the context of that service, yet they offered themselves to the fullest extent that they could, and such is true with this contact. Is there a further query, my brother? Gary: yeah, that makes perfect sense, that naturally, even in the course of the Ra contact, they were not receiving the full experience of Ra, nor the internal experience of Ra. Ra exists in a different reality several steps removed from ours, and tens of millions of our years, of course. In that dynamic between Ra and the original group, Ra is meeting the group using the group's language and doing the best to impart some kind of vision of the universe. But no way is the group even coming close to touching the lived experience of being a sixth density social memory complex. So that's all fully understandable to me. But in comparing what channeling a source directly can offer versus channeling a source via this repository, is something lost. I am Quo, and I am aware of the query, my brother. We feel that it may not surprise you that we are somewhat reluctant to speak in terms of loss in such a context as this. For indeed, nothing can be lost to the Creator, but in an even more practical sense, we would not necessarily speak to the difference between such a context as that different contact done with trance channeling with those of Ra and a contact such as this. We would rather define it simply as other than or different. Our intention in our previous reply was to demonstrate more than the context of each act of service calls upon the different aspects of the one offering service. And so while we understand that it may seem that there was more of Ra to be offered, and indeed in many perspectives that is true, we would define a contact such as this to contain a different context of Ra without speaking of it as a loss necessarily. However, in a very limited sense, as we understand your query, we could say that there are certain ways in which we as a social memory complexes can manifest that might seem more useful or meaningful to certain entities in other contexts that are not available or possible within a context such as this. Is there a further query, my brother? Gary: I doubt there will be more to say, but clarification the whole time I was trying to get at, not the difference between the Quo channeling and the trance channeling of the Ra contact, but rather the quo channeling which happens via this repository, and the conscious channeling of those constituent sources of quo like Latui and Hatan. I'll do a quick check on this question, but if this has already been spoken to, then no worries. We are quo and would simply add to this query that we utilize this example of a difference between the raw contact as you understand it and this contact simply to demonstrate the dynamic nature of how the context of such channeling can change what the individual social memory complex may offer. And while it may not be as extreme of a difference with the conscious channeling of other social memory complexes, the idea remains the same. Is there another query, my brother? Okay, yeah, beautifully put all of that, particularly around how context offers service and invokes the creator in different ways. So I'm going to ask a question about the spectrum of channeling from trance on one end to the conscious channeling we do on the other, presuming that those are two ends of the spectrum, and this question is not to imply that there's some better or worse scale there, it's just to explore the available possibilities. That said, is there something deeper between those two poles as I'm describing it, of the conscious channeling that we do now and the trance channeling? Something deeper and more focused and more accurate than, say, conscious channeling, but less so than trance, some middle step between those two. I am quo, and I'm aware of the query, my brother. We would offer a slight refinement based on our own understanding and perception of the act of channeling from our own perception, and that is that while you may view the difference between the conscious channeling and the trance channeling as a sort of spectrum, there is a point at which the trance channeling, as this group is familiar with it, for example, that being the contact with those of Ra, is a separate exercise. And while the act of conscious channeling can present itself upon a spectrum, where one side of the spectrum that is something that seems very similar or close to trance channeling, and the practice of conscious channeling can help the instrument to learn about the different states of self and become malleable and open to entering into that separate state of trance. The trance channeling, as you are familiar with it, is not necessarily on one end of a spectrum from conscious channeling. However, to the spirit of your query, the act of conscious channeling can be viewed from certain perspectives as being upon a spectrum. And further down the spectrum, the self might sink deeper and deeper into the act of channeling and swim deeper within the waters of the unconscious mind, through which we are able to communicate and contact instruments, and in doing so enter something that is more like a trance, yet unlike the trance channeling that you're familiar with. For the mind-body-spirit complex and the beingness of the entity remains intact and contained within the body, within your space-time. But the conscious mind and the what you might call ego that wishes to have some bearing and hold upon this dance may shrink itself to such an extent that the rhythm unfolds with more purity through the instrument, and the conscious mind disappears even to the extent that the entity becomes unaware of those words that are being spoken, and the vibrations and harmony moving through it only coming to conscious realization after the act is complete. This would render a different quality of information in channeling than you are familiar with in the types of conscious channeling that we have been able to engage with, particularly with this configuration of this group. Is there a further query, my brother? I'll have to read the text of that. Thank you so much, Quo. That was great. Myself and many other readers see humor in the text of the Law 1. If possible, I'm wondering if you can speak to whether those known as Ra at various points throughout their 2,630 give or take Q&As intended humor, and maybe even intended to poke the questioner a little bit. I am Quo, and I'm aware of the query, my brother. We would offer a question in response to your question in suggesting that one contemplate what is humor and what creates what you consider a humorous situation. What is it that tickles the funny bone, so to speak? This can look very different from different contexts. We can speak for our experience within this dance we have called channeling, that there is great fun and thrill and enjoyment in attempting to express ourselves in conjunction with you, who have offered yourselves as instruments in attempting to confine what we have to offer into a stream of individual words and thoughts that can be understood in an abstract sense. From our perspective, the very idea of this is humorous. To chop up our beingness and our thoughts and what we have to offer into individual bites, and attempting to feed it through an instrument such as you, and such as the one known as Carla, those of Ra during their contact through the one known as Carla indeed experience this same type of thrill and excitement and fun. We have referenced several times within this session the act of channeling as a dance, and we would say that a dance is intended to be in many ways a fun expression of the self, and those of Ra, in attempting to utilize the contact as it was configured, danced with the words and danced with the questioner in ways that from your perspective could be seen as perhaps poking fun or making jokes, but from our perspective simply as having fun with the act of co-creation and engendering and enabling the contact with humor, which is an important and even sacred aspect of the creation that imbues the love and the light of the Creator with essence in a very real way. Is there a further query, my brother? That was beautiful, and yeah, I have one more, and then that's it. For me, it heads up to this circle that when the contact is transferred to me, I'm going to take an extra minute to retune. We as human instruments are channels in the context of public meditations and in gatherings and to seekers who send questions, and we want to be of the highest service that we can. So I would just ask you about your mission in replying to seekers' questions and how we as human instruments can most effectively facilitate the fulfillment of your mission, and thank you. I am Quo, and we find that this instrument has become exceptionally drained, and we have been overeager in offering to accept a further query. And so we offer our apologies to you at this time and ask that this very meaningful question be posed to us at a later session, for we do wish to speak upon it, yet we agree with this instrument in feeling that the current contact would be inadequate in addressing it in a meaningful way. And so at this time, we would take leave of this instrument and transfer the contact to the one known as Gary. We are Quo. Gary channeling. We are those known to you as the Principal of Quo, and thank the Circle for their patience and the retuning of this instrument so that he may join you in lending his voice to this greater practice and dance of the channeling as we engage this instrument so that together we may continue our journey of seeking the one Creator, each from our own illusory standpoint, each made of the same love and the same light and the same origin. At this time, we would ask if there is a query to which we may respond. We are those of Quo. Thank you, Quo. I have one that is a bit of a preamble and might be confusing. I'm going to word it the best that I can. In October 17th of 1988, Quo said, "We have appeared as many, many things, including angels. We appear in thought alone at this time and find that the mass of those who would seek our information prefer the, as this instrument would say, mythology of the spacecraft, and the visitors from elsewhere to the equally valid manifestation and thought of the angels or the vision. My question is about the idea of mythology as you used it in that statement. When we think about mythology, we typically think of sort of a fiction or a story, particularly something symbolic or an allegory. I have the sense that mythology in this sense can be something much deeper and manifests itself in reality in very real ways. And I use as an example that the real phenomenon of UFOs that appear as though they are spacecraft, and that it's a prominent aspect of our society at the moment. And so can you elaborate on the idea that the spacecraft are mythology, and the narrative of you as visitors from elsewhere is a mythology similar to that being a mythology of angels? We are those of Quo, and thank you for this question, my brother. And indeed, we can, using your thought complexes and those symbols known to you as the words of your language, attempt to elaborate on this very interesting question regarding the role and meaning of mythology in your human culture, in our relationship to this, and in terms of the appearance of that known to you as UFOs. First, we would set the backdrop of all experience in the universe of any density, of any octave, as being that of the formless, boundless, infinite one, in which there is no time or space, or two-ness or manyness. This infinity cannot be understood by the intellect, nor particularly that mind which is in the veiled condition, nor can the many great truths be understood, particularly those primal distortions, to those within the veiled condition. Instead, for those entities bound by space and time, inhabiting a very finite, seeming space operating within a reality wherein all things are separate from one another, the means and recourse of an entity in attempting to grapple with that which is deeper than its highly limited conscious experience is that vehicle known to you as mythology. This mythology may in some senses and cultures serve as a means of understanding that which is otherwise unexplainable. For an entity operating within an illusion which it does not understand, an illusion within which there seem arrayed a great deal of forces and events and patterns recognized, but whose meaning, purpose, maybe timing are not understood, a mythology can give order and coherence, not just to one entity, but to a community. A mythology can bind the community together in shared reality and shared understanding. It is a deeper layer of software, shall we say, that allows individuals and groups to function, to operate together. Understanding, though not in its truest sense available to those of third density, is even in its shallow and illusory way needed for the entity to be able, shall we say, make sense of its world, whether that is a Neolithic world or a world of AI. Mythology may, in its broadest sense, be understood as the deep story of how entities understand and relate to and indeed use their reality. Those of your present culture may believe that the art and practice of empirical methods have banished mythology from your society. And while empiricism does have great strength in relying upon testable hypotheses, observation, and evidence, it is not mere fabrication to attempt to explain that which was previously unexplainable. It, too, is at its level a mythology, a more refined mythology, shall we say, but it, too, is a story about who you as a people are. But at the level of mythology, it sinks down into those deeper levels of the racial and planetary mind, such that it becomes the generally unquestioned assumptions. It becomes the walls of reality as well you may see it. An entity inserted into any given mythology, including the relative global mythology of the scientific paradigm, is, or rather automatically adapts this paradigm, this story, as its own. Such an entity is imbued and programmed and predisposed to operate within and embody this construct. It is not to say that such an entity will find harmony and be in consonance with their surrounding mythology, but it will be within their being nonetheless. And as we in the Confederation interact with your peoples at any given time in your history, we must take careful consideration of the orientation of your peoples in their deeper held, even if subconscious beliefs. For we always wish the most non-invasive and non-disruptive service that we may offer. We would not wish insanity, imbalance, or destruction or dismantlement of those deeper reality structures and the scaffolding within which and upon which those of you as a people operate. Instead, we wish always to meet your peoples from where they are and to inspire them to look from that vantage point forward. We correct this instrument toward that which is beyond and thus that which is truly imminent. We do hope for a transcendence of the mythology, but only insofar as that story or myth keeps the heart closed and keeps or encourages or facilitates the disharmony and the separation and the bellicosity between your peoples. However, it is not our story to write for your peoples. We can only offer our perspective and calibrate it as best we can to your own. Speak again in an analogy operating software, and in that regard, there are various guises within which we may appear as thought forms to those who call, including that of the angelic presence, including that of the unidentified flying object presence. For much, particularly of that you would call Western history, the angel would be the more appropriate form, though this is a figure near universal to those of your planet. However, we would remind that the planetary mind is in and of itself capable of creating projection phenomena and events in your world without external input. This mind, you as individuals are almost entirely unaware of it, yet it constitutes the deeper strata of the mind of every individual upon your planet, and is, as all strata of the mind, inherently intelligent, pattern-making, dynamic, and moving. We would ask if there is another question, my brother, whether in follow-up or new. Yeah, and this can be a quick clarification. Austin asks, or you can elaborate however you would say. The way I understand you talking about mythology is that the mythology is sort of a way for us as individual aspects of the Creator to grasp something that is beyond the mythology. It's a way for us to interface with something that is further beyond. That the mythology isn't the thing itself, but it is simply a way for us to comprehend it, because we can't comprehend the fullness of it like you were talking about infinity. So when you reference the manifestation as a spacecraft or as an angel, as a mythology, is that meant to mean that whatever you are, you exist beyond those specific manifestations? That those are simply sort of interfaces that you utilize for us to be able to understand you and grapple with you, and your own reality is much bigger than those specific things that we comprehend. We are those of Quo, and we would say that this is a fair statement, my brother. We would add that those of the higher densities are not without means of travel that may manifest in space-time to those of that density as an observable object. We would add, though, that there are also those who have visited your world in a craft which is not necessarily conforming to your mythology at the time of the visit, but which is of their own making. But yes, we calibrate our service accordingly, and you, through your own stories, find that meaning and interpretation which is right for you. We would add that some of rather much of the discord and disunion in your world is due to your peoples lacking an overarching unified story, and also the inability of the old stories to serve your peoples at this time. Thus they become weakened and leave those who had once found comfort in their structures feeling insecure and disoriented and seeking answers and security. We are those who Quo and would ask if there's another query, my brother. Austin. Yeah, I'm still in line. Thank you for all that. Still in line with the idea of mythology. You had mentioned in your previous response that even the idea of our science, materialism, empiricism, that itself can be considered a sort of mythology. And I think this question probably comes from being steeped within that mythology. For what I see in that is an objective view of how things really are in a certain way. That there is a reality that is comprehended more accurately, or maybe a more refined view of reality that can be comprehended through the utilization of that specific mythology of science and empiricism. Would it be fair to say that as we as human species have evolved, that the mythologies that we develop become more and more refined to depict a picture of the creation that is perhaps more, I don't know if accurate is the right word, but more of a complex and nuanced and I guess accurate depiction of the creation? And on top of that, basically, is the idea, that have the Confederation as entities from elsewhere and from other planets, you've evolved your own lives, and you are what we would call extraterrestrials coming here to help us. If that mythology is a more nuanced take on the idea of who and what you are than, say, the angels of old, if that is more accurate but still a mythology, the same way that science and empiricism might render a more accurate view of the creation but are still in mythology, I hope that makes sense. We are those of Quo, and indeed, these queries do make sense, and in the relative spectrum of the perspective of your society at present relative to what it had been in the past, there are some spiritual perspectives and understandings and connections that have been lost by the empirical approach. The, as you would say it, baby has been emptied with the bathwater to some degree, that being that awareness of the sacred and inspired quality of life in the material realm. That approach which you call the empirical has indeed, it may be rightfully said, improved in accuracy relative to those old mythologies in understanding the physical illusion, the thunder of your skies. Your science has learned is a function, according to this instrument's memory base, of the lightning and its effects upon the molecules in the air and the consequent sound that makes, and not quite the thunder god. So your science has indeed made incredible strides in learning how the physical illusion operates in various ways, which has given humanity even greater power to exploit and use that illusion, often without the spiritual orientation that would properly inform how that illusion can be stewarded and put into service to others toward the healing of your peoples and the healing of the planet. Regarding your present collective lens, which disarrayed though it may often be, does share an underlying coherence, particularly in terms of the paradigm being arbitrated by those of the scientific community. It may be fairly said that there is a movement towards understanding, if you will, those of our nature and beingness relative to who we are to your peoples in centuries as you see it past. You indeed possess a more sophisticated understanding of our purpose and relationship with those of your planet. But indeed, we may examine this term of, as you have called it, extraterrestrial, even the various and often pejorative connotations that come loaded with that term, Baked into that term is a worldview or a mythology that has not yet grasped the universal nature of life. And the stories of your people, while contact has been made with various individuals and groups throughout your history, your apparent, we correct this instrument, your axiomatic story as a global society, though there is belief strongly in life upon other worlds, is that life has yet to officially or authoritatively make itself known. Humans, in the main, though their religious and philosophical beliefs may posit other entities, have yet to cross this threshold. Thus, there is a story regarding what extraterrestrials, hypothetical beings, though they may be to your peoples, may or may not be in terms of their existence and their relationship with the only intelligent life those of your people know. Were you a, say, spacefaring race which had made contact with many worlds, or were you a people which had accepted contact from other beings, we assure you that your present story around extraterrestrial would be updated. And we would conclude this response with the confirmation that indeed there is a vertical trajectory to evolution whereby those of the positive polarity seek ever more and more to see things as they are. Your approach to the empirical efforts of science is indeed a step upon that journey, and was also reaction to those periods that came before. However, we shall hint that there is much road yet ahead. We are those of Quo and would ask if there is a final question to which we may respond, whether in follow-up or new. Yeah, one final one, Austin says. Thank you so much, Quo. Related to what you were just saying, the seemingly surface narrative upon our planet is that we as a species have not yet found or acknowledged intelligent life elsewhere besides our own brains. And I see this as a mythology, the idea that there is life out there. And I think more specifically, what has been called disclosure. That there is something, an element within our institutions that does know this but is hiding it from us. And that's a particular mythology among, I guess, what you call believers. And I was wondering, since we seem to be entering a new chapter of that mythology, things are ramping up in terms of people paying attention to the mythology of disclosure, and I'm realizing as I pay more and more attention to it, that it definitely does seem to be a mythology that people are manifesting and enabling and using as a catalyst. If you could, from your perspective, as that non-human intelligence speaking to us, tell us how you see that sort of current in our society now of this push for disclosure. But more specifically, how people who are engaged with it are relating to that push for disclosure in their attitudes, their conceptualization of what UFOs are, the idea that there are hidden elements in our government that are exploiting technology and have knowledge that they're withholding from us. There are so many aspects of this mythology. I was wondering how we can relate to it from what I would desire a spiritual perspective, a law of one perspective, and how we can bring clarity to this mythology in a way that helps you and helps us. We are Quo, and we thank you for this bouquet of questions, my brother. Indeed, your peoples have been anything but predictable in our attempts to be of service and to understand the patterns and movements of your desires and perspectives. Those of your world respond to catalysts from where they are, shall we say, as an index of their own spiritual development or non-development, as the case may be. Many, of course, including among the community to which you refer, those yearning for information, for disclosure, for quote-unquote truth, are not precisely upon a path of the spiritual seeking. Their motivations would not be difficult to understand. Entities of this community are drawn to this question by various needs, various motivations, some of them in the quest to understand the world in which they live and trying to make sense of it. Some motivated by a fiery passion in response to their certainty that important, relevant information has been hidden from them. Some drawn to this question with a desire to build a harmonious world in service to others, and so on and so forth. In terms of our perception of and response to this moment, we attempt our best, as yours. Even this subculture of which you spoke is not a unified grouping, nor is your world. There are players, as you may call them, in the global power game who would distort whatever we may or may not do. We can only continue on, as always, offering humble service to those who call, And for those seeking to understand the universe outside of the illusion, you may say, that universe wherein love has built, designed, and created all that there is, we wish to offer that information which empowers, that information which may precipitate healing on an individual and global scale. Many are those within the community that you named as well who understand, perhaps not fully consciously, the dawning of a new age that is ready to be born, the stymieing, retarding effects that governmental secrecy may exert upon the birth of this new world, the philosophical import of understandings that may result in the representatives of the paradigm officially acknowledging other conscious intelligent life, to those technologies which may also serve your people and disrupt those resource industries which strive mightily to preserve a certain order in your world which serves the few at the expense of the many. There were a variety of questions asked, and we would ask if there are any unspoken. We are those who quote. Yeah, the main question was basically how you would encourage us to relate to this mythology of disclosure from a spiritual perspective and catalyst. However, I think I would like to review what you have said before questioning further, so I can say, that's it, I think. Thank you, my brother, for these questions. We were happy to speak to, and at this time we transfer our contact to the one known as Trisha for our final message before leaving the circle. We are those known to you as the principle of Quo, Adonai. We are those of Quo, and we are again with this instrument, where we would like to issue our immense and genuine gratitude for the opportunity to connect and work with this circle of seekers to be in service to one another. And we would like to state how inspired and moved we are to work in this dynamic with this group, where we can see the sincerity of the seeking and the purity of the intentions. It is ever and always an honor. And at this time, we shall take our leave of this instrument and of this group, and wish in our departure the bountiful blessings that are your birthright as extensions of the one infinite creator. And so we bid you adieu. And as we say, Adonai, my friends, Adonai Vasu Borogas. So this is a unusually long channeling with a very unique focus. We learn about the dynamics of channeling with Quo, the differences between trance channeling and non-trance channeling. People will comment how the Quo channeling is so different than the raw channeling that people in general don't understand or even realize that the law of one channeling by raw is directly related to this. These are the same people that were doing the channeling, and raw is involved in these channelings. The original raw contact was done in a very unusual method in which Carla was unconscious during the channeling. She did not know what she said. She was completely unaware of it. And it was dangerous. Her energy was reduced and she was attacked by negative entities. And dangerous things started happening to that group. And she was willing to sacrifice herself to do this. The genuine danger involved in this was that Carla was completely out. Something terrible could have happened to her. It was implied. And she was willing to do that. And so Quo was created in order to do these channelings consciously, so that all the people involved were conscious. They didn't get knocked out completely and become unconscious as Carla did in that channeling. And so there's some interesting questions I've always asked. What's it like when three social memory complexes are interacting? Is it like an AI or is it something more? And they say it's something more that's happening. And then we get a very interesting discussion of mythology directly related to the nature of channeling from a higher density being. So imagine trying to explain to an ant what a mountain is. There are concepts that we simply do not understand. And oftentimes they probably use the mythology of the world to explain things. So if you're going to present yourself in the year 1000 AD to a group, you might present yourself as an angel. It's easier for them to understand. They've read the Bible and they know what angels are. Even though you're not necessarily an angel, it's easier for you to communicate. They will look up to you as an angel and understand the information that's coming through. What they're communicating here is that they utilize the mythologies that are available. In general, I believe that once you reach a certain level of advancement, that there are no spacecrafts. That's why we don't see a lot of spacecrafts. They simply teleport. They simply appear. They don't need to travel in a spacecraft. And so there's a mythology of the spacecraft because it's in our limited understanding of how those worlds work. Everything is a thought away, and people travel by the speed of thought. They do imply that there are groups that do travel by spacecraft. And then there's an interesting discussion here at the end about disclosure and the nature of disclosure. Some of these people that are involved in the disclosure movement is not a spiritual thing. They're questioning the government. They're questioning whether the government is giving us all the information that we have, and that Quo themselves and the people involved with Quo, or the groups involved, whatever you want to call it, only want to be of service in the humblest way. They're not trying to rock the boat. They're just trying to be of service to help you out. And so there's this sort of interplay when they communicate information, and this comes from their previous experiences of directly working with people on our planet, as happened in Egypt. So there's a lot to get from this. I'd love to know what your favorite part of this channeling. I know that at times it seems complicated. There's an energetic thing that happens when you listen to or read these channelings that goes beyond the actual meaning of what they're saying. I can feel a difference just by reading these words. I may have to go back and listen to this, as I always do, to better understand it. But in any case, you can find the Quo channelings on my playlist, the Quo playlist, and you can find all episodes at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to the Reality Revolution.